Welcome back. This is World Insight on Tian Wei. Efforts to form Afghanistan's new government appears to be picking up steam as the Taliban urges holdouts in the north to lay down their arms. They have called upon resistance fighters in Panjshir Valley to negotiate a peace settlement. Unfortunately, that already broke down. In the capital, Kabul, Taliban leaders said that talks are still underway for an inclusive government that will respect the people's rights and freedoms within Islamic law. The group is expected to name a supreme leader soon. How will the new government, quote unquote, likely turn out? Will it get international acceptance? For answers, I talked earlier to Maleeha Lodhi, who served as Pakistan's permanent representative to the United Nations in New York and earlier also ambassador of Pakistan to the US and to the UK. And here are her takes. In Islamabad, I'm joined by Maleeha Lodhi, former permanent representative of Pakistan to the United Nations. She was also the ambassador to the US and the UK for Pakistan. Ambassador Lodhi, what a pleasure to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
There are so many things going on. How do you see the latest going on in Kabul with the new government likely to be formed? But how well informed do you think the rest of the world will be about this quote-unquote open and inclusive government?
It's another turning point for Afghanistan, which, as you know, is Pakistan's neighbor. I think we're all waiting. The international community is waiting. Pakistan is waiting to hear and see what the new government in Afghanistan will look like. As you know, the Taliban have promised an inclusive government, which means it has to be a broad-based government. Afghanistan is an ethnically divided country. So the only way that it can achieve peace and security is to have a government that reflects and represents the various ethnic minorities and political groups that are important in Afghanistan. So this is, this is a decisive moment, I think, for the country. On the one hand, there's an opportunity to establish long-lasting peace. But on the other hand, there is the fear or the challenge that there is so much that the new government has to do in order to reach the goal that we would all like Afghanistan to reach, which is one of peace and prosperity for its people.
Before that happens, already a lot of things going on. For example, the fighting going on between the Taliban faction and also the Northern Alliance, or shall we say those in the Panjshir Valley. It was no surprise to anyone, but still, do you see the danger of so-called civil war once again on the rise in Afghanistan? Or the Taliban could pretty much control most of the territory?
Well, I think the hope is that they're able to control their own territory and establish a degree of security. It will take time. And I think the international community should show patience because don't forget, Afghanistan has been through not just 20 years of war as a result of the US foreign military intervention there, but it has also in the last 4 decades seen conflict, strife, civil wars, and of course, foreign occupation.
Right.
So, this is a war-ravaged country.
Yes.
It will take time for them to establish the kind of peace and prosperity that we would all like to see for the Afghan people. I think a very important test for the Taliban will be if they can govern their country. Because, the Taliban leaders have been saying that they want those people who fought against them to continue to serve the country because the Taliban don't have enough people in the ministries that can run the country and that can govern the country. So this is going to be a big test.
But on the other hand, we see the neighbors of Afghanistan all are quite worried and nervous about what to come. Pakistan, I guess, is one of those that's standing out because if you look at Taliban as a terrorist organization, the Pakistani Taliban is being categorized as many as the terrorist organization, while the Afghan Taliban, who are now trying to form a government inside Afghanistan, is not anymore. How do you see, the earlier link between the Pakistani Taliban and the Afghan Taliban, and how do you see they are different from your perspective?
What Pakistan has already done is to ask the Afghan Taliban to ensure that the what is called the Pakistani Taliban is not given a place in their country, a safe haven, so that they can carry out attacks against Pakistan. We have been reassured by Taliban leaders, but an assurance is words. We would like to see these words matched by action. But I can tell you, it's not just Pakistan that has a concern. Every neighboring country has a concern. For Pakistan, the concern is, of course, the Pakistani Taliban. For China, it is the ETIM. For the Russians, it is Daesh or ISIL. For the Americans also, it is Daesh. For Iran, they are very, very worried about how the Taliban will treat the Shia population of Afghanistan, because in the past, there were atrocities that were carried out by the Taliban against the Shias. Now, what the Taliban leaders are saying is that they have actually made a promise to the international community that they will not allow the soil to be used against any country. No country will be attacked from the soil of Afghanistan. But we have to wait and see. Again, we have to see how effective they are in containing these groups and ensuring that they're not a security threat to any neighboring country.
What does that mean for Pakistan? Of course, one of the closest neighbors, and also one of those countries who the U.S. Has been accused a lot of in not doing enough against the Taliban.
Well, I mean, look, the allegations against Pakistan, I would simply reject them, because it is a way in which those who could not win this war try to find an excuse or a pretext or a scapegoat.
Interesting.
So I think that is something that they have to figure out for themselves. After all, if they spent 20 years in fighting this war and were unable to win, the reason must lie with them and not with Pakistan.
Meanwhile, how do you see Pakistan would engage while at the same time maintain its leverage over Afghanistan?
I think the important question really is whether the international community will remain united, because no single country, including Pakistan, has enough leverage now to nudge the Taliban towards a certain direction. But if there is collective action, if the international community is united, then there is a good chance that the Taliban will try to translate the promises they've already made to the international community into actions. So I think the important issue is going to be collective leverage exercised by a united international community.
According to Washington, the kinds of leverages comes in different categories. For example, confiscate the earlier, properties and belongings of the Republic of Afghanistan, and now to provide that to the new government in Afghanistan. That's what the Americans consider as leverage. They also have drone attacks, which of course also kill many civilians at the same time. They think that will be the leverage against the terrorism inside Afghanistan. They also have the leverage, as they see it, sanctions against this country. But that's their version of so-called leverage. What kind of leverages are you talking about, Madam Ambassador?
I think we have to look at both incentives, which is a positive leverage, and disincentives, which are negative. And some of the ones that you've listed are mostly negative. We believe, like China, like Russia, like other neighboring countries, we believe that it is time to engage positively, and we can hold out leverages, or we can use leverages like a diplomatic inducement of international recognition, that is positive, international assistance, investment. These are all positive ways in which I believe the international community should influence the Taliban. Because if only the stick is used, and in fact, if the stick is used at all, we believe it will have a counterproductive effect. We've seen the history of sanctions against most countries. It has an opposite effect. If anybody wants to change any country's policy behavior, it is best to do so in a positive way.
Now, before we go, Madam Ambassador, last question for you. Very complicated geopolitics. And many wonder whether countries have wrongly prioritized their most important tasks, whether it's against the terror or against another country. For example, whether the U.S. is thinking about only against China while ignoring other priorities. But that's only one thing. The thing is, we have a very different world today compared to 20 years ago. So when you say international community coming together, how realistic is it? And what kind of picture, what kind of mechanism do you think they will be able to do in order to come together, in your words?
You know, I think there is already international consensus on issues, core expectations of the international community. Everybody wants to see the same outcome in Afghanistan. And I would say that there are three key elements of this. One, the expectation that Afghanistan's soil is not used for attacks against any other country. So that's on counterterrorism. The second is, this is not in any order, all are important. An inclusive government, broad-based, broadly representative. And third, respect for women's rights, human rights, and international humanitarian law. So I think on these issues, because don't forget, these are all reflected in a UN Security Council resolution of the 16th of August. And all 15 members of the Security Council obviously agreed to the statement that they issued. But the one challenge I think that we have seen recently in the last meeting of the UN Security Council is when China and Russia abstained on a Western draft resolution, and finally it went through. But China and Russia disagreed with the way in which several things were mentioned in this draft. And there was also this feeling that it was pushed very, very much in haste. So, you know, that points to the challenges ahead. It's very important, at least for the UN Security Council, to remain united on Afghanistan, to have the same perspective. Because if there is disunity, I think that will give the Taliban the space to wriggle out of some of the promises that they have made, which will not be good for their country, and certainly it will not be good for the neighbors and for the rest of the international community.